Her age was a brand seared onto her by every scornful glance in Redemption Gulch. Abigail Sawyer was a woman deemed finished, invisible before her time. But the West held secrets deeper than any canyon, and a love more defiant than any outlaw. For beyond the town's cruel whispers, the Cheyenne elder, his own heart burdened by profound loss, would see the fire in her that everyone else had dismissed. Together, they would forge a bond that would not only challenge the harsh judgments of their world, but also unveil a truth that would shake Redemption Gulch to its very foundations. This is their story. Abigail Sawyer knew the language of solitude well. Her hands, though weathered, moved with a practiced grace, whether coaxing stubborn vegetables from her small, arid garden patch, all that remained of her father's legacy, or mending the torn fabrics of townsfolk who offered meager payment and an abundance of pitying looks. 40 years had etched themselves onto her face, a number that, in the unforgiving arithmetic of the frontier, often meant a life concluded rather than one still unfolding. Her small cabin, standing apart at the edge of Redemption Gulch, was a fortress of quiet dignity against the subtle, persistent siege of societal expectation. The town's matriarchs, like Mrs. Pendleton, whose pronouncements carried the weight of Scripture, would sigh and remark on what a capable woman Abigail was, always followed by the unspoken lament of her solitary state. The few bachelors or widowers who passed through Redemption Gulch scanned the younger, brighter blooms, their eyes sliding past Abigail as if she were part of the landscape. The bitterest pill had been the loss of her main farmland. Bartholomew Higgins, a man whose smile never quite reached his avaricious eyes, had arrived with a smooth tongue and a cleverly disputed deed. He had taken the best of her land, leaving her with just enough to scrape by, his victory a smug pronouncement of her decline. Abigail endured these slights with a composure that many misinterpreted as passivity. But beneath the surface, a keen mind observed, noted, and filed away the hypocrisies of Redemption Gulch. Her gaze would often stray to the distant, hazy peaks of the Medicine Bow Mountains, where the Cheyenne were said to roam. The townsfolk spoke of them in hushed, fearful tones, but Abigail felt a strange resonance with those untamed lands, a sense that life there, however harsh, might be more honest. She possessed a strength honed not in conflict, but in quiet endurance, her observations sharp, her thoughts her own closely guarded counsel. The raw wound of Higgins' land acquisition was painfully fresh when he chose the town's mercantile as the stage for his next casual cruelty. Abigail was present, hoping to trade a meticulously crafted quilt, weeks of finger-pricking labor for essential supplies. Martha, a young woman whose prettiness was only surpassed by her eagerness for male approval, was also there, captivated by Higgins' booming voice. His eyes, landing on Abigail, narrowed with a dismissive smirk. He addressed Martha loudly, ensuring all could hear that a flower as fair as her shouldn't be found in such wilted company. He gestured towards Abigail, suggesting Martha align herself with those who represented a future, not with someone whose prime was a fading memory. A wave of heat washed over Abigail's face. Her fingers tightened on the quilt. The storekeeper suddenly found the arrangement of his shelves fascinating. Other customers developed an urgent need to examine distant goods. Higgins, basking in the attention, continued his flirtatious banter with Martha, each word a tiny, poisoned dart aimed at Abigail. She completed her meager transaction in silence, her chin held high, and walked out, the echo of constrained giggles following her into the dusty street. The weight of their collective disdain felt almost physical. Later that day, dust plumed on the horizon as a rider brought news. A Cheyenne band, led by an elder, had established a temporary camp near Willow Creek, several miles east, for trading. A nervous tremor went through Redemption Gulch. Old fears, some real, many imagined, resurfaced. Higgins immediately seized upon it, his voice loudest in proclaiming the potential danger. Abigail found herself needing supplies beyond the mercantile's limited stock, and the thought of enduring more pitying stares was unbearable. Willow Creek had a small, remote trading post. An impulse, sharp and clear, urged her to go. It was a chance to breathe air untainted by the town's judgment, even if it meant venturing closer to what others deemed perilous. She packed a few items, a resolute set to her jaw. The confines of Redemption Gulch were suffocating. She sought the open, honest breath of the prairie. The path to Willow Creek was a solitary trek, winding through sun-baked earth and whispering grasses. With each step away from Redemption Gulch, Abigail felt a measure of peace return. The trading post itself was a humble, weathered structure, managed by Silas, an aging, laconic trapper. As she approached, she saw them, two Cheyenne warriors, their presence striking against the muted landscape. And then, another figure older, his bearing imbued with an innate dignity that transcended his simple attire. His face, a chronicle of seasons lived beneath an open sky, was etched with sorrow, yet his eyes held a profound, steady wisdom. This, she sensed, was Black Kettle, their elder. He turned as she drew near, his gaze meeting hers, direct, appraising, but devoid of malice. Abigail, usually so reserved, felt an unexpected easing of her internal defenses. She offered a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He returned it with equal subtlety. Silas shuffled out, grumbling a hello. Abigail began her trade, bartering precious dried herbs for flour and salt. One sack of grain proved unexpectedly cumbersome. As she prepared to struggle with it, a shadow fell beside her. Black Kettle stepped forward. Without a word, he gestured towards the sack, then effortlessly lifted it, placing it gently where she could manage. "Pahe," he said, his voice a low rumble. Silas, ever observant despite his gruff exterior, supplied the translation. "That's a thank you, or close to it. Name's Black Kettle." Abigail looked into the elder's eyes, truly seeing him. She offered her own thank you, her voice quiet but clear, adding that he was kind. A brief, almost startled expression flickered across his stoic face before he simply nodded and rejoined his companions. The exchange was fleeting, minimal in words, yet it resonated deeply within Abigail. A moment of unadorned human courtesy, a fragile bridge across a vast cultural divide. Her return journey was shadowed by an unwelcome encounter. Bart Higgins, on horseback, saw her on the trail, noting her direction of travel. By nightfall, his poisonous insinuations had taken root in the fertile ground of town gossip. He announced in the saloon, his voice thick with feigned concern, that Abigail Sawyer had been seen consorting with the hostiles, coming directly from the direction of their camp. He painted her as a woman of questionable loyalties, hinting at dark possibilities. He conveniently omitted any mention of the trading post. Higgins was already eyeing the fertile lands around Willow Creek, lands the Cheyenne often used for grazing. If he could manufacture sufficient fear, portray them as an imminent threat, he might just be able to claim those lands too. Abigail, already an outcast, was the perfect pawn in his scheme. The town's demeanor towards Abigail frosted over completely. Doors that had once creaked open a grudging inch now remained firmly bolted. Children, echoing their parents' anxieties, darted away from her path. The isolation she had always navigated now became a stark, unyielding wall. She found herself increasingly drawn to the solitude of the prairie, her walks often taking her to vantage points where she could observe the distant Cheyenne camp. She watched them from afar, hidden by rocks or tall grass, noting the rhythms of their daily life. Children playing, women tending tasks, men engaged in pursuits that spoke of a deep connection to the land. It was not spying born of malice, but of a burgeoning, inexplicable empathy. Black Kettle's simple act of kindness stood in stark contrast to the town's escalating hostility. A sense grew within her that her path was diverging, leading her away from the life Redemption Gulch had dictated. The atmosphere in Redemption Gulch curdled further. Higgins, relentless in his ambition, stoked the embers of fear into a crackling blaze. He spoke of the Cheyenne as a looming danger, a barrier to progress that needed to be decisively removed. His pronouncements were draped in civic duty, but his eyes, when he thought no one was looking, held the unmistakable glint of avarice for the lands near Willow Creek. One morning, the cry went up, cattle rustled. Jedediah Finch, a rancher known more for his nervousness than his acumen, whose land bordered the area the Cheyenne frequented, was frantic. Higgins materialized at his side almost instantly, his face a mask of theatrical outrage. It was the Cheyenne, he declared, his voice resonating with certainty. Who else, he demanded, could it be? They had been too quiet, he asserted, clearly biding their time for such treachery. A grim-faced crowd quickly assembled, fear rapidly outstripping reason. Higgins, a practiced conductor of public alarm, called for a posse to track the thieves and deliver swift justice. Men reached for their rifles, their judgment clouded. Abigail observed from the periphery, a cold dread tightening in her chest. Only the day before, while gathering herbs near the creek, she had seen two of Higgins' own men whose loyalty was notoriously for sale, discreetly herding a small group of cattle eastward. Their path led away from Finch's property, but crucially, also away from the Cheyenne encampment. Their furtive movements and constant, anxious glances had struck her as peculiar then. Now, the pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Higgins was manufacturing a crisis. He was sacrificing a few of Finch's cattle to ignite a conflict, to create a pretext to drive out the Cheyenne. Or worse, the cold calculation of it sent a shiver down Abigail's spine. These Cheyenne, Blackheddle, had offered her a moment of respect, of shared humanity. Higgins and his supporters offered only deceit and contempt. A steely resolve solidified within her. She could not, would not, remain a passive observer to this injustice. The townsfolk were ensnared in a web of fear and Higgins' manipulations. Someone had to alert Blackheddle. The thought was terrifying. To approach a Cheyenne camp alone, as a white woman, with tensions at this pitch, was to court disaster. Arrows, or far worse, could be her welcome. And if the townsfolk discovered her actions, the label of traitor would be swiftly followed by a rope. Yet, the image of Blackheddle's dignified countenance, the echo of his quiet sorrow, and the unexpected kindness he had shown her, all coalesced to override her fear. He was a man acquainted with loss, much like herself. There was a silent understanding there, a connection that transcended spoken language. She slipped away from the agitated crowd, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. She knew the hidden trails, the swiftest routes to Willow Creek. Every rustle of sagebrush, every shadow that danced at the edge of her vision, seemed an accuser. But she pressed on, propelled by a desperate yearning for truth, and an emerging, unspoken kinship with a people she barely knew, yet was beginning to understand far more profoundly than those she had lived amongst her entire life. The prairie stretched before her, vast and indifferent, yet it now felt less like a barrier and more like a precarious bridge to justice. The trek was an agony of heightened senses and raw nerves. Abigail moved with the stealth of a hunted creature through the tall grasses and shadowed ravines, imagining Higgins' posse at her heels, or unseen Cheyenne scouts marking her progress. Each snapped twig was a thunderclap in the taut silence. When the conical shapes of the teepees at Willow Creek finally emerged from the landscape, smoke spiraling gently into the late afternoon air, her breath hitched. There was no retreat now. She advanced with deliberate slowness, her hands held open, palms forward in a gesture of peace. A sharp bark, then another, announced her presence. Figures emerged from the lodges, warriors, their expressions impassive, weapons appearing with startling suddenness. A cold wave of fear washed over her, but she compelled her trembling legs forward. She had to reach Blackheddle. She called out, her voice quavering but carrying, that she came in peace, that she must speak with Blackheddle. A tall warrior, his chest adorned with painted symbols that spoke a language she did not know, stepped towards her, his gaze intense and questioning. He spoke in the Cheyenne tongue, his words sharp. Abigail shook her head, conveying her lack of understanding, repeating Blackheddle's name, stressing her need to warn him. More Cheyenne gathered, women and children peering from teepee entrances, their eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. The air was thick with unspoken questions, with palpable tension. Just as a sliver of despair began to penetrate her resolve, a figure emerged from the largest teepee. It was Black Kettle. His eyes, when they found her, registered surprise, but not immediate hostility. He raised a hand, silencing the warrior. Abigail stumbled forward, the words erupting from her in a torrent. "Mr. Higgins, from Redemption Gulch. He was lying. He claimed your people stole cattle. He was bringing a posse. They intended to attack." She recounted what she had witnessed, Higgins' men, the surreptitious movement of the cattle. Her voice was hoarse with urgency, her face etched with genuine alarm. The younger warriors exchanged uneasy glances, their distrust a visible current. Some tightened their grip on their weapons. But Black Kettle listened, his dark eyes fixed on Abigail, searching her face, her demeanor. He remembered her, the quiet woman from the trading post, the one whose eyes held no guile. He saw the authentic terror in her now, the desperate plea for him to believe. He also remembered his own profound loss, his wife, Singing Reed, taken by the white man's sickness the previous winter. He understood sorrow intimately, and he recognized the spirit of one fighting against a looming injustice, however outmatched they might seem. He asked slowly, his English careful, if she spoke the truth. As God was her witness, Abigail managed, tears finally escaping and tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. They would be there soon. He wanted this land. He wanted to drive them away. A profound silence enveloped the small assembly. Black Kettle looked from his warriors to Abigail, then back again. He had encountered this brand of treachery before, the insatiable hunger of the white man for land, their readiness to employ deceit and violence to achieve their ends. The white man's greed, he murmured, more to himself than to her, was a relentless fire. Then, his gaze met Abigail's directly, and a deep sadness softened his features. "My wife, Singing Reed," he said. "Her spirit left us when the snows lay deep. My heart has been an empty lodge since that day." His words, so unexpected, so deeply personal, resonated with Abigail to her very core. In that charged moment, surrounded by suspicion and the threat of imminent violence, an unspoken understanding formed. Two souls, each acquainted with loss and the sting of isolation, found a common ground. Black Kettle turned to his warriors, his voice firm. "This woman," he declared, "has risked greatly to bring this warning. We will heed her." Then, to Abigail's astonishment, the faintest hint of a smile touched his lips. "Higgins," he mused, "is a man of loud words, but perhaps his mind is not so sharp. You know this town, Redemption Gulch. You know this man. Tell me, Abigail Sawyer, what specific weakness does he possess that we might use, besides his aversion to truth?" And so, as the sun bled orange and crimson across the western sky, casting long, foreboding shadows, an improbable alliance was cemented. Black Kettle, the grieving Cheyenne elder, and Abigail Sawyer, the ostracized settler, began to weave a plan. It was not a plan for war, but for the unmasking of a liar, using Abigail's intimate knowledge of Higgins' character, his vanity, his overconfidence, and the two men he trusted with his dirty work. The true turning point was not merely his belief in her, but that in their shared vulnerability and combined insight, they found a strength and a strategy that neither could have conceived alone. The last vestiges of daylight clung to the prairie as the faint, rhythmic drumming of hooves announced the posse's approach. Black Kettle's warriors, armed but artfully concealed, blended into the deepening twilight that enveloped the clearing. Abigail stood near the central fire, beside Black Kettle, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat mirroring the approaching riders. Yet a strange calm had settled over her. She had made her choice. The elder himself was a study in stoic composure, his weathered face unreadable, but his eyes, missing nothing, held a sharp, anticipatory light. Soon, Higgins and his riders, some 15 townsmen, A mix of eager aggressors and visibly reluctant participants came into view. Higgins, puffed with self-importance, rode at the head, his rifle held ostentatiously. He reined in sharply, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of Abigail standing, not as a captive, but as an apparent equal beside the Cheyenne elder. A sneer twisted Higgins' lips as he recovered. "Well now," he drawled, "look what the wind blew in. Seems our little spinster has found herself some new companions. Or are they your keepers, Abigail?" Black Kettle's voice, firm and resonant, cut through the charged air. "She is no one's keeper but her own, white man. She stands here as an honest woman, a quality some in your party might not recognize." Higgins' face darkened. "Honest," he scoffed. "She's a turncoat, a disgrace to her own. We're here for stolen cattle, Cheyenne. Hand them over, and the woman, and perhaps we'll overlook this trespass on decent folks' land." "There are no stolen cattle here," Black Kettle stated, his tone unyielding. "Only the stench of lies carried on a deceitful wind." "Lies," Higgins blustered, gesturing dramatically towards Jedediah Finch, who shuffled his feet, looking increasingly wretched. "Tell him, Finch. Tell him about your missing herd." Finch stammered that they were indeed gone that morning. "Tracks," he added weakly, seemed to lead this way. At that precise moment, as if summoned by Black Kettle's subtle signal, two of his young scouts emerged from the shadows. They led two men, their hands bound, their faces a mixture of fear and resentment. They were, unmistakably, Higgins' own ranch hands, the very pair Abigail had described. A ripple of murmurs went through the posse. Their bravado began to visibly fray. "These men," Black Kettle announced, his voice carrying clearly in the stillness, "were found not far from here. Not with our herd, nor in our camp. They were found with Finch's cattle, hidden deep in the eastern coulee, a place much closer to the trail leading back to Bartholomew Higgins' own spread." Higgins' eyes seemed to bulge. That's preposterous, a damnable lie. They're all lying, every one of them." Abigail's voice, surprisingly steady and clear, joined the elders. "Is it a lie, Mr. Higgins? I saw these men myself, only yesterday, driving those very cattle. I noted their furtive behavior then. Now their actions are perfectly clear." She then added a detail only she could know from her observation of Higgins' habits. "And I recall you, Mr. Higgins, meeting with these two behind the livery stable just 2 nights past. Your voices low, your heads close together. Planning this, were you?" The specific detail about the livery meeting struck one of the bound men like a physical blow. His eyes darted to Higgins, then to the stern faces of the posse. Seeing his employer's growing panic, and perhaps fearing the quiet menace of the Cheyenne more than Higgins' bluster, he suddenly cried out that Higgins told them to do it. Higgins himself, he accused, said it would stir up the necessary trouble with the Cheyenne, get them run off, so he could claim the creek land. The confession hung in the twilight air, heavy and irrefutable. The expressions on the faces of the posse members morphed from aggression to confusion, then to a dawning, angry comprehension. Their gaze shifted from the sputtering, cornered Higgins to the dignified Cheyenne elder, and then to Abigail, whose quiet courage now shone undeniable. Higgins, his carefully constructed facade crumbling, began to shout incoherently that she had bewitched them all, that they were savages, that no one should listen. He raised his rifle, his eyes wild with desperation, perhaps intending to fire and ignite the chaos he so desperately needed to cover his exposure. But before he could act, a commanding voice from within the posse cut him short. "Put that rifle down, Bart." It was Marshal Thompson, the town's usually quiet lawman, who had been observing the proceedings with a grim, assessing gaze from the rear. "It seems to me," he continued, his voice like chipped flint, "the only real savage here tonight is wearing your boots." Other men in the posse slowly, deliberately, lowered their own weapons, their faces hard as they stared at the now isolated Higgins. The artificial support he had cultivated through fear and falsehood dissolved like smoke in the prairie wind. Bartholomew Higgins stood alone, his arrogance deflated, his treachery laid bare for all to witness. Justice, it seemed, even under the vast, indifferent sky, had a way of finding its moment. The tense confrontation at Willow Creek concluded not with the crack of rifles, but with the quiet, decisive ruin of one man's greed. Marshal Thompson, his duty clear, took a visibly shaken Bart Higgins into custody, along with his two now-confessing ranch hands. The remaining members of the posse, their faces etched with shame and a newfound respect for the Cheyenne elder and the quiet woman at his side, offered mumbled apologies to Black Kettle before making their subdued retreat towards Redemption Gulch. Their thirst for vengeance had been entirely extinguished by the unpalatable truth. In the ensuing days, Redemption Gulch was a hive of shocked whispers and reevaluation. Higgins faced a swift trial before a council of town elders. Abigail's testimony, delivered with calm precision and unwavering honesty, was the final nail in his coffin. Stripped of his fraudulently acquired land and publicly branded a cheat and an instigator of conflict, Bartholomew Higgins was given a single day to vacate Redemption Gulch, his name to become a byword for deceit. He rode out under a heavy cloud of disgrace, his ambitions reduced to dust, his reputation irrevocably tarnished. The immediate danger to Black Kettle's people was lifted. They remained at Willow Creek for a while longer, a tentative, fragile peace settling between them and the chastened townsfolk, a peace built on the hard-won currency of mutual, if wary, respect. For Abigail, however, her place within Redemption Gulch had fundamentally shifted. Some, like Martha, continued to shun her, their whispers now tinged with unease, suggesting she was somehow changed, perhaps even gone native. Yet a smaller, more thoughtful contingent regarded her with a quiet admiration for her courage and integrity. But Abigail knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she no longer belonged in Redemption Gulch. The whispers held no more power over her. They were merely the inconsequential buzzing of insects. Her world, once so narrowly defined, had expanded to horizons she had never before dared to imagine. A few weeks later, as the Cheyenne readied themselves to follow the herds to their wintering grounds, Black Kettle sought Abigail. He found her by the creek, her gaze fixed on the flowing water, a profound serenity gracing her features, a serenity that had been absent for so long. The town, he observed, his voice gentle, it is no longer your home, is it, walks with courage? This was the name he had bestowed upon her after the night of the confrontation. Abigail slowly shook her head, a faint smile touching her lips. No, she affirmed, it never truly was. My people, Black Kettle continued, his eyes holding hers with a steady, earnest gaze, we journey soon. My lodge, it has stood empty for too long. My heart has walked a solitary path since Singing Reed departed. You are a woman of strong spirit, Abigail Sawyer. Your eyes see clearly, and your heart speaks truth. Our paths have been different, but a good trail is made better when shared by two. He was not offering her charity, nor a desperate alliance against a harsh world. He was offering companionship, profound respect, a life to be built together. Abigail looked at this elder, this man whose wisdom and sorrow had unexpectedly mirrored her own. In his gaze, she found no judgment of her age, no condemnation of her past solitude, only a deep, unwavering acceptance of the woman she was, the woman she had become. She reached out, her hand gently covering his weathered one. I would be honored, Black Kettle, she said, her voice filled with a quiet joy, to walk that path with you. And so, Abigail Sawyer, once the overlooked and scorned woman of Redemption Gulch, rode away from the town that had long since ceased to be her home. She rode not towards an uncertain future, but towards a new life, a new family, at the side of a Cheyenne elder who had seen her true worth when others were blind. Theirs was not the fleeting, fiery passion of youth, but the deep, enduring warmth of a hearth fire on a cold night, a steady comfort against the inevitable hardships of the frontier. It was a love story written in the dust and sunlight of the untamed West, a testament to shared loss, mutual respect, and the quiet, unyielding courage to defy a world that sought to keep them apart. The trail dust rose behind them, not as a symbol of an ending, but as the promise of a new beginning. For on the vast, sprawling canvas of the frontier, the most profound and lasting stories are often painted with the most unexpected of unions, and true belonging is discovered not in conforming to the world's harsh dictates, but in bravely, defiantly, carving out one's own sacred space, with a love as steadfast and enduring as the ancient, silent mountains that watched over them.